Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brever and alongside me is Logan Camden, and today we are going to be ranking the top 10 duos in the NBA, which I am very excited to get into. But first, if you missed it, we were on Player's Choice earlier today, so we already talked 3 hours of basketball with all the guys over on the panel, which is a whole bunch of fun, so you can go ahead and check that out. But for the task of the day, Logan, ranking the top 10 duos in the NBA, before we start with our official rankings, I want to know, what was your criteria? What was your thought process when making this list?
So originally I thought my criteria was just solely going to be, like, what's the lowest combined number I would have for players in rankings? And what I mean by that is if I had, say, for example, number 1, I would add Jokic, and let's say if Jamal Murray was number 25, for example. These aren't real, but they would have a total number of 26, and then by that, wherever they factored in with the total number of other guys is where I would put them. But I didn't go straight forward with that, and I do have a few logical inconsistencies with that methodology, but I think it's important that one of my criteria for sure is that the guys are complementary to each other, and I don't want to have a significant liability on one side of the basketball court or the other, and so I will rule against if, like, there are some redundancies or stuff like that. For the most part, it is, are you better than this duo, right? Is this guy better than this guy? But it's not true for all of them. I do think that complimenting the other person is important. I do think two-way value is important, but it's not just, apples to apples across the board. What about you?
I agree with that. And the way that I would put it is, I am viewing this list in terms of, if I can presume health just for this season, which duos would I want most as the foundation of my team to then build around? So it's not purely an evaluation of talent, like you were saying. That is certainly a significant component, but it also is relevant if you have two dudes with particularly complementary skill sets. I'll prefer that to two dudes who have more redundancies. And I do think it's important to note that I am viewing this just in terms of who are the best duos as that starting point, because we have a wide range in terms of surrounding situations. For example, on this list, I have a duo that I think has the worst surrounding situation of any team that is trying to be serious in basketball. And then I have a duo that has an absolutely insane, historically great supporting cast and surrounding situation. And I just have a feeling that people are going to want to view this purely in terms of, oh, this team has won this many games, so this duo has to be number 1 or has to be top 2, when I don't think that's necessarily the case. And if anything, I think this exercise tells you that today's NBA has so much talent that it can make a huge difference the supporting cast you have around your top 2 guys. And ultimately, it can be much more important who is your 3 through 7 if you have a really good duo, compared to just purely having the best duo if you have a lackluster supporting cast around them. So that was how I viewed it. Who do I want most as my foundation for this year? If we're presuming health, I should note when we're talking about health, we are not considering duos for this list who are done for the year, who have a player who is not going to be returning. So that most notably includes AD and Kyrie, not here. Fox and Wemby, not here. Embiid and Maxey, not here. With all that being said, Logan, who do you have in your 10 spot?
In my 10 spot is a pretty much solely offensive duo, and I omitted another solely offensive duo in their place that I thought was going to make my list, which I'm really intrigued to see if they're on yours. I have Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns in my 10 spot, and to just let the cat out of the bag, the duo that I omitted was Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And the reason that I did that is, I think I would have KD probably above Jalen Brunson. I like, just as individuals, I think I would probably have Devin Booker above Karl Anthony Towns as well. I think I'd have Brunson above Booker, but below Kevin Durant, just as like a starting point. But the reason I go with both of these guys is because I think they do a better job of enhancing one another. And the Suns duo, in my opinion, was the hardest to rank on this list because I really do value both of them. as offensive players and offensive engines, but I don't think they enhance one another. And at the end of the day, even though what you were talking about with the supporting cast, and I think the Suns supporting cast is horrible, I feel like their record would be better if they were a better duo. And I don't know if that's the best way to think about it, because I think KD and D-Book would probably be locks to make this list last year. But the edge that I gave to Brunson and Cat were that they do enhance each other and that you can run actions in your offense together with the both of them. And I think they both make each other better. Cat, because he's a floor spacing center that can give Jalen Brunson all of this space to work with inside the arc. I think it's a stark contrast to how the Knicks were getting buckets last year, right? It is Jalen Brunson driving basically into a forest with Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hardenstein and all these non-shooters and all this defense. And now that's been flipped on its head this year, where New York is basically an offensive haven with all this space to work. And I think that Brunson has maximized Cat's abilities, and I think Karl-Anthony Towns maximizes Jalen Brunson's abilities. Why can they not be higher? Well, to me, and this could be an argument for why you might leave them off your list entirely. We'll see. I think they're two glaring positional, defensive liabilities, and that's why they can't be any higher on my list, and why I would hear an argument for someone leaving them off of their list, right? I don't even think you can apply that to Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. They may not be elite defenders, either of them, but they're not glaring positional liabilities that limit my team defense, which I do believe is the case if you're going to play Cat at the 5 and you're going to play Brunson at the 1. You got an undersized, pretty much, not effective point guard at all in Jalen Brunson, and then you've got a center who isn't really a rim protector, and so I just think it puts a really, really hard cap on how good your team defense can be, and ultimately that's why I don't look at the Knicks as a real deal contender despite all of their talent. That's why I think they're pretenders. So I would understand someone leaving this duo off their list, but I do think they enhance one another. I think they're an elite offensive duo, and that's why they're here for me.
So I actually have the Knicks duo one spot higher at number 9, but I have the Suns duo one spot higher than them at number 8. And I am going to do some defending of Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on this list, because I do think that they don't rank as highly for me as their talent purely would in a vacuum, because KD to me is still a surefire top 10 player. Book is at worst a top 20 player. And so that, you could argue, could put them even a couple spots higher than where I have them. But I do think they have certain redundancies. For example, the fact that neither one of them is a good rim pressurer. That leads to the Suns being by far the team that makes the fewest shots per game in the restricted area. In fact, it is by such a wide margin that the gap between them and the number 29 team in terms of restricted area makes is the same as the gap between the number 29 team and the number 16 team. So both Book and KD are outside the top 150 in restricted area makes. That matters, not just because they're not getting those easy shots at the rim, because that's also a great way to create drive and kick opportunities. It really is important to get all the way downhill, and neither of these guys do that at a high level.
I was just going to say, that's an incredible stat, man. That is ridiculous.
And that has always been one of the limitations of this duo. Then you also have the fact that although they're both good passers, neither one is a real high-end playmaker. Book has been bad defensively this year. I do think that he's a solid defender when he's engaged. So they have their redundancies. I still think it's easier to build a great team around the two of them than it actually is with the Knicks, even though I think that their duo is phenomenal offensively. I look at the Suns duo, and I think if you put the right guys around them, there isn't a core fundamental major red flag in the KD Book pairing like there is with having the worst defensive duo of any that we'll talk about today, with Brunson being such a limitation at the point of attack, who great teams can hunt relentlessly, all the while Cat is a huge liability defensively on the back end, who is going to really, really limit your defensive ceiling. KD and Book, yes, they have some overlap. They're also one of just the greatest scoring duos ever, and they are two phenomenal individual talents, and they don't have those sort of defensive questions. And when they share the floor, Logan, the Suns have a plus 6.4 net rating. That is a better net rating than the New York Knicks have in the minutes that Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns share the floor. The Suns also have a 27-19 record when both KD and Book play this year. They're still 8 games above 500. Book is giving you 26, 4, and 7 on 60% true shooting. KD is giving you 27, 6, and 4 on 64% true shooting. And since those two teamed up in the playoffs, it's only 15 games, but Book has been a 32, 4, and 7 guy on 68% true shooting. KD has been a 28, 8, and 5 guy on 61% true shooting. So they are still both dominant scorers of the basketball who can totally take over in a way that is very rare, even among these great duos that we're going to talk about. The problem to me really is that they have the worst supporting cast alongside them of any basketball team that is trying to be serious. They have an abominable defensive supporting cast. They have had 0+ two-way role players over these last couple years. You could argue that Royce O'Neal has maybe been that this year, but is he a plus offensive player? I still wouldn't say so. He's just been shooting the ball relatively well. They have had a disgustingly bad situation in terms of their bigs. Nick Richards is now the best that they've had, but we're talking about them starting Yusuf Nurkic for a year and a half. They haven't been able to supplement any of the high-end athleticism that maybe KD and Book are lacking alongside them. They haven't added that high-end playmaker. Like, they have completely and utterly butchered the team building around them. Meanwhile, I think the Knicks have kind of nailed their team building around Brunson and Cat, right? They have put defensive-minded, two-way, versatile wings. They have put guys who can knock down shots and cut in Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, and a guy who can play make and who can be a really high-level offensive rebounder and transition presence and play his ass off in Josh Hart. They have 3 really good basketball players as their 3 through 5. The Suns, frankly, don't have another good basketball player on their roster, and still, when KD and Book are on the floor, the Suns have a better net rating than the Knicks do with Brunson and Cat. It just speaks to me to the ceiling that is put on a team built around 2 glaring defensive liabilities like Brunson and Cat. As much as I love them on that end, I can't overlook the major defensive issues. So if I were to choose who I want as my 2 building blocks, like if I could give the Suns the Knicks supporting cast, and I mean that straight up, right? Even if that means now they're playing small ball, I think they're a better team than the Knicks. I think that they're switchable as hell defensively. I think they're a better defensive team. KD and Book can both be real contributors, especially KD with his length on that end. Offensively, now you have dudes who at least command some respect off ball alongside Book and KD. It's just an easier way to build a great basketball team. We just unfortunately haven't seen it, especially over these last 2 years, because the Suns have been completely incompetent around those 2 guys. But I still think they are a great duo. They've just been put in a terrible situation.
It's a good argument. I ultimately left them at my number 11 spot, though, and I do think Brunson and Cat complement each other a little bit better than KD and Book. But
offensively, sure.
You still haven't said who's in your number 10 spot, though, right?
I haven't. And I'm really wondering how you're going to have Book and KD off this list entirely. Because personally, I feel like there's a clear gap for me even between 9 and 10.
I know one duo that I'm 100% sure you're not going to have on your list.
That you do have?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I do want to just reiterate with Book and KD. Like, you think about what they did as pull-up shooters against the Denver Nuggets in the 2023 playoffs. Is there another duo on the planet that can do that? There is not. And that really does matter to me. 2 guys who can give you an efficient 30 in a series. Again, it's just a disgrace what the Suns have done around them. But in my number 10 spot, I have Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. And I'm a little bit conflicted about this just because I don't know exactly who Kawhi Leonard is right now. My estimation is that when we get to the playoffs and he's in rhythm and he's had a couple months to tune up, you're talking about a top 15 guy, probably right around the 15th best player. And then I think Harden is like a top 35 guy. The Clippers have been good when these two share the floor. They're a +8 net team in the minutes that they're out there together. And I do think that these guys actually do complement each other nicely. I like that you have Harden as that guy who can be an offensive floor raiser, who can make so many decisions for you, who's such an elite playmaker, who's still an elite isolation and really good pick and roll scorer, but he also has some volatility there because the guy just can't finish at the rim anymore, and that's where Kawhi comes in, and when he's right, he's this absolute assassin as a scorer. who doesn't need to have the ball in his hands too much, but who gets wherever he wants on the floor. Elite catch and shooter, elite pull-up shooter from both beyond the arc and the mid-range, elite strength, always plays at his own pace, and that's made him one of the best playoff scorers we've seen in a long time. He has consistently gotten even better there compared to the regular season. But again, Kawhi hasn't been that guy who we're accustomed to. He hasn't quite been himself since coming back from injury this year. He's only giving you 23, 6, and 3 per 36 minutes on 55% true shooting. He has regressed athletically over the years, but this year, you've really noticed a step back in terms of his rim pressure declining. He's not getting to the line really at all. And I think that he's been a bit selfish, and that's where you see some of the inefficiency. Not the best shot selection from him at this point, not the best playmaking out of him. I do think his shot making will just get better, and I do think because of the combination of strength and shot making that he has, he is still an elite playoff scorer and a real plus defender when he wants to be. So that's basically what I'm betting on. I'm betting on the combination of Harden's elite playmaking with Kawhi's elite scoring in a playoff environment. And when I compared them to the alternatives, who I considered for my number 10 spot, shout out to some honorable mentions, Hallie and Siakam, great offensive duo. Ja and Triple J, who I considered. Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine now, even though Domas is hurt right now. I just think compared to those groups, these two, if they're right, have the highest ceiling as a duo. And maybe it's crazy. I still trust healthy Kawhi, if he is able to play his way into a rhythm, to be that really high-level scorer in the playoffs and to still have that real positive two-way impact. So I am going to bet on them more than any of the alternatives.
I think Kawhi just looks also like slow and stiff too. That's been the biggest
First step
thing for
does not
me.
look the same.
I don't. Harden and Kawhi are not on my list. I didn't really think too hard about that one, and part of it is Kawhi's regression, but also the bigger part is just I don't really believe in Kawhi's health, and I've said that a lot on the show before, and I just, even if we were assuming health, and I'm just not going to give him that pass anymore. And like right now, like my Clippers duo would have probably been Zubats and Harden, and again, I don't mean that as a slight to Kawhi, not because he's not that good anymore. I think it's a figment of our imagination. I think it's all theoretical. I just don't think we're ever going to see Kawhi again close to full health. And unfortunately, I think this is going to be a really ugly, slow, nasty descent into, I don't know, him getting really old. I think he's going to look better than this, but it's just all a little too theoretical for me.
Let's be honest, it's all because you hate James Harden and you would never put him on a list
It's not.
of any kind.
I think James Harden is a good basketball player.
Harden is a good basketball player, man. All right, who do you have in your 9 spot?
So I'm actually wondering if you do have this duo on your list. I have Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert.
No, I do not have them on my list.
Then never mind, you don't. The reason I went with them over Brunson and Cat, I do marginally, it's very, very close. I think Ant and Jalen Brunson may very well be next to each other or be within 3 or 4 spots of each other in my rankings. I do marginally prefer Anthony Edwards, but it is close just with the floor that Jalen Brunson gives you on a nightly basis. There's a little less volatility, I think, with Brunson than there is with Ant and his pull-up shooting. It's basically because I get the best of both worlds. I get a defensive anchor, and I know Gobert isn't what he once was, but I'm getting an offensive one and a defensive anchor, and that's why I went with Ant and Gobert over the likes of a Brunson and a Cat. Gobert is the worst player on this list. It's not even close. He is by far the worst player on any of these duos. But, and that's another thing, is they don't complement one another at all. And that's why I could see you leaving them off this list or being negative about them, because they don't. I mean, Gobert is a 0. He is, again, the most significantly limited and worst basketball player in this bunch. But when I compare him to a Brunson and a Cat or a KD and a D-Book, I've got 2 guys that can anchor both ends of the floor, and that's ultimately why I went with this duo.
It's an interesting choice. I can see the vision. Personally, I do think that Gobert definitely would be by far the weakest player on this list if he were to make it for me. And I don't really like how these two complement each other. Now, I like what Gobert can give me as that elite defensive player, but I just think Ant is not mature enough as an offensive player, as a decision maker and a playmaker, to be able to thrive in spite of the congestion that you get when Rudy Gobert is your center. And that's why I think we've seen Ant play significantly better offensively when Gobert is off the floor. His true shooting percentage goes up by multiple points in the minutes when he's on the floor without Gobert. And I think you also just see that there's a complete lack of trust for Ant when it comes to even finding Gobert off the roll, finding him in the dunker spot. Like, he just does not trust him offensively, which makes him even more of a negative because now he's clogging up space still on the inside and he's missing out on some easy opportunities. The Timberwolves just haven't been that good when these two are on the floor together. They're a plus 2.7 net team. Remarkably, actually, the Timberwolves, out of all of the combinations of these two being on and off the floor, have been by far their best with both of them off the floor. And I think that's where you see Gobert's offensive limitations hurt Ant, hurt this team offense to the point where they're really going to be mediocre there. And then you have minutes where Ant's on the floor without Gobert and the offense is better, but the defense is way worse. And then you have minutes when Gobert is on the floor without Ant, when the defense is great, but the offense is bad. And so in all of these different iterations, they kind of just end up being a slightly above average team. If Ant had been able to be a more efficient version of himself, not a guy who's shooting under 48% on twos this year, if he had grown more as a playmaker, and so this offense could be better with Gobert on the floor, then I could see the case for them as the top 10. But as things are, I think I get more complementary skill sets with Kawhi and Harden. I think I get more complementary skill sets with Brunson and Cat at least being dominant offensively to the point where they're still a really good team even with their real defensive limitations. I think to really make this version of Ant and Gobert work as a duo, they needed an offensive four as great as Cat, because when those three shared the floor together last year, Ant, Gobert, and Cat, the Timberwolves were a really good team. They were a +8 net team because Cat was such a great offensive player who could also be a functional defensive player in that system, in that role. You downgrade from Cat to Julius Randle, and now you look at this year, and when the new big three of Ant, Gobert, and Randle shares the floor, they're a +1 net rating team. They're basically just a completely average team. So without an exceptional talent like Cat at the 4, I just don't like Ant and Gobert as a duo all that much.
Yeah, I mean, neither do I. But, I mean, they can
well, you had to have Ant on here with somebody. You would have liked it to be Ant and Naz Reid if you had your way, I'm sure.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, so in my number 8 spot, I have KD and Book. I think we've already talked about them enough. Who is in your 8 spot?
I have Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And
the people are going to be mad about this one.
The people are not going to be happy about this one. Now, the positives that I can give this duo, both great defensively, positionally. That's one of their biggest strengths, is just this is one of the best defensive duos on the list. Like, you can throw any perimeter pairing at these two, and they're going to be great. The one thing that I have an issue with, because it's not with Jayson Tatum. I think Jayson Tatum is a phenomenal basketball player. I think he may have his flaws and inconsistencies scoring the basketball, but in every other area outside of scoring, Jayson Tatum is a beast. And I don't even mean that, because when Jayson Tatum's on, he is a great scorer. You know, I don't want that to get misinterpreted or anything, but everything else is really, really reliable with Tatum. The defense that I get with Tatum on a nightly basis, where he can defend 1 through 5. The rebounding that I get with Tatum, where he's really effective and he's always got juice and energy. The guy always gives A+ effort. He's a legitimately great playmaker and ball handler now, where I just have confidence in him running an offense. And so I've never been higher on Jayson Tatum, and this isn't the only duo that I have Jayson Tatum in on this list.
Oh, whoa. I didn't know that was eligible.
Well, I didn't either, but I don't know. We didn't set any rules or parameters.
Well, you didn't set rules. Okay. Interesting. I would have had multiple Celtics duos on this list, and that's not how I have it.
Gotcha. My issue is with Jaylen Brown, and when it comes to him pulling his weight and among these other guys, because I think Jaylen Brown is arguably the second or third worst player on this list. And I like Jaylen Brown. I like what he provides. He's a really good transition scorer. But he's not like an anchor on either side of the floor. Like, he is a legitimately great defender, but he's not like a one-man defense. And on offense, I think he is a really, really significantly flawed basketball player as a floor spacer to a team offense. But more importantly, my issue when we talk about this duo is just how toxic it gets, because a lot of people in the basketball sphere were very quick to crown Jaylen Brown. And Jaylen Brown had a phenomenal NBA Finals. He was super effective on Luka Doncic. He scored in transition. I don't want to take anything away from a Finals MVP. But when we heap all this praise on Tatum and Brown and them alone, we take for granted all of the great players on the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics are a great super team. They are not a great super duo. This is not Kobe and Shaq we're talking about. This is not even Stephen Curry and Draymond Green. This is certainly not Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant. Like, when we're talking about all-time duos, I'm sorry. I understand their accomplishments. I'm not dense. I understand that they won the NBA Finals last year. I watched it. I get that Jaylen Brown is Finals MVP, but to me, I look at other guys on this list. Jaylen Brown is not Evan Mobley to me. Jaylen Brown is not Jimmy Butler to me. That was the biggest issue that a lot of people took with us when we were ranking our small forwards in the offseason. How is Jaylen Brown not above Kawhi Leonard? How is Jaylen Brown not above Jimmy Butler? I think you guys have just he might be above Kawhi right now. I'm not particularly high on Kawhi. I'm really disappointed at the level that he's been at. But he's still not over Jimmy Butler to me. I don't care what Jimmy Butler does in the regular season. I know what I'm getting out of him in the playoffs. And we're looking at these guys as number ones. He just doesn't hold up. Like, he is a really, really flawed offensive player. And again, to reiterate the big point, it's just that I think that a lot of Celtics get taken for granted when we do this thought exercise. I think you take for granted Derek White, who, and that's my big take. I think that Jaylen Brown is closer to Derek White than he is Kristaps Porzingis. Like, I think you take for granted Drew Holiday. I think you take for granted Al Horford. This is a great top 7, top 8 here in Boston. It's not, there's just the de facto 1 and 2. They are great basketball players, but they are not the entirety of this basketball team. Like, I don't know, Carson. It's like they treat Tatum and Brown like their situation is Phoenix. Their situation around them isn't Phoenix. Their situation around them is Boston, and Boston just happens to be one of the best basketball situations, point blank period. So I do have 2 Celtics duos on this list. Jaylen Brown is not a part of the better Celtics duo. I think there's a better player on the roster, and yeah, I just think that the aggregate talent in Boston can kind of get taken for granted when we do this thought exercise.
So that's really interesting. Like I said, I did not include multiple duos from any team. I would have had Brown and Tatum on this list, probably in this exact spot. I just do think, like you, that there is a better Celtics duo. And I get that a lot of people will be upset about that. And a lot of people seem to think that I hate Jaylen Brown, which is so funny because I love Jaylen Brown. I've been a Cal basketball fan my entire life. He's the best NBA prospect to come out of Cal in my lifetime. He's the best prospect they've recruited in my lifetime. I had so much fun watching Jaylen Brown. I'll always root for the guy. I just think, especially once we start getting into Brown versus Tatum, who's the best Celtics player discourse, like, that needs to stop. I do think that the raw box score can overestimate his contributions a bit because his efficiency really has been bad this year. 55% true shooting. He has been a bad jump shooter from beyond the arc and from the mid-range. 26th percentile efficiency on all jump shots. That's not good. His assist numbers have gone up. He's able to make a lot of easy reads in this Boston offense with shooting all around him. I still think that he is clearly a below average playmaker, but he does awesome stuff. I think that he's a great man defender. I think that he is a really good mismatch attacker because he's so strong. He can play such bully ball. Sometimes, though, you can tempt him to try to take a lot of those shots over top of smaller defenders, which sometimes works, but sometimes doesn't because, again, he has been an inefficient jump shooter this year. So I just think there's another Celtic alongside Tatum who provides a more distinct, super valuable, efficient two-way skill set.
More complementary to Tatum as well.
More complementary as well. And I'm glad that you brought that up because, again, the way I'm viewing this is these two are my building blocks. This is my foundation for building a team. Tatum and Brown can work together, clearly, but they do have some overlap. And I think that they are currently in the best possible situation to succeed together because they have so much skill around them. They're able to play relatively simple drive and kick stuff. They're both able to find mismatches and then find a 40% three-point shooter if they draw help. Whereas Kristaps Porzingis, I think, is a guy who, in any situation, you put him and Jayson Tatum together and they do so much that enhances one another. Whereas Tatum and Brown, it's more like they're both really, really good basketball players who are in a situation where their skill set overlap doesn't hurt you because they're just so insanely great.
And just to illustrate that point a bit, too, the Celtics won a finals without either of these guys playing great offensive basketball. Like, I know that Jaylen Brown had games. Tatum ends up in the finals shooting 38.8%. Jaylen Brown shot 44% from the field. Like, if that doesn't speak to the greatness of this basketball team top to bottom, I don't know what will. Like, they were able to overcome Jayson Tatum being off for the entirety of the playoffs as a scorer. And again, as we mentioned a million times during that run, he impacted the game in every other single way. But again, I just don't want to take for granted how great the Celtics team is as a whole. They're one of the greatest teams in basketball history.
100%. And that's the main headline for the reason that I don't have a Celtics duo number one on this list, when I think that they have been the most overwhelmingly great team over the last couple of years. There were people who will look and say, oh, well, they won the title last year. Doesn't always make you the best duo in basketball, man. Like, their third player, whether you think it's Brown or Porzingis, is like a top 25 to 30 guy. And then their fourth player is clearly a top 40 guy in Derek White, still one of the most underrated players in basketball, probably. Elite defender, elite shooter, good playmaker, exactly the sort of fourth option you would dream of. Then you have Drew Holiday, who is still such a high-impact winning player. Then you have Al Horford. Then you have Peyton Pritchard. They're just ridiculously good, and that's why you look at their net rating, like in any combination, you take any one of these dudes off the floor. This is what I was talking about the other week when we had Rusty Buckets on. Over the last couple years, they're 10-2 without Tatum. They're 20-3 without Brown. They're like almost 50-10 without Porzingis now. They're, I think, 24-6 without Drew Holiday. They win 80% of their games if you take any one of those guys away because the aggregate talent is that great. Basketball is a sport that we always want to make about the stars. We always want to make it about the faces of the team. A lot of the time, it's just that the supporting cast is the difference. And we've hardly ever seen a better supporting cast in NBA history than the current Boston Celtics. So because of that, I would agree with this placement of Jaylen and Jayson. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props.
Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. First timers, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly.
Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Who do you have in your 7 spot, Logan?
I think this might be my most controversial one, and I'm interested to see if you have them on your list. I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Chet Holmgren here, and I debated whether they were going to make my list or not, and I ultimately decided yes, because I have Anthony Edwards and I have Rudy Gobert on this list, and I only think it makes sense logically to have this duo here. One, why are they over Tatum and Brown? I think SGA is better than Tatum, and I think Chet Holmgren has a more complementary skill set to SGA and can be more of that one-man defense. Now, this isn't based off this year. I want to be clear about this, too. This is more of a projection and just what I expect from this duo moving forward and into the playoffs, because so much of this year, Chet Holmgren has not been healthy. It has been Isaiah Hardenstein. It's been Thunder Small Ball. It's been this collective team defense. And I think this team defense would be great even if they didn't have Chet Holmgren. But that being said, I don't want to take for granted how great of a defensive player Chet Holmgren is. And to get more specific into that Anthony Edwards and Gobert comparison, one, Holmgren is not a zero offensively. Rudy Gobert is. I know that Holmgren can have his off nights, and everybody was clowning him for that 8 points, 3 of 11 game against Denver. Chet can go off on any given night in a way that Gobert just can't. And I think he's a better defensive player already than Gobert. That coincides with, one, Gobert slowly getting worse, and Holmgren ascending. But Holmgren's always been great on that end. And SGA is one of the best offensive players in the sport right now. So they're complementary to one another. I'm getting an anchor on both sides of the basketball court. And, it may not be the most overwhelming offensive duo. Man, I'm looking at this, and I'm wondering if I should even have these guys one spot higher.
I have them higher. I'll tell you that right now.
I think they should maybe be 6. I think I should maybe have my 6 duo. I'm going to come back to this. I might swap my 6 and 7 here, but SGA and Chet Holmgren are going to make my list.
I have them all the way up at number 4. And the biggest reason for that is that, again, I'll explain my philosophy. It is, how highly do I view you as the foundation of my team? And the reality is that SGA is at such a monumentally high level right now that he alone is going to put you really high in these conversations, because the most unbelievable stats, Logan, that I was digging up last night, OKC's net rating when SGA is on the floor with any of his best teammates off is mind-boggling. When he is on the floor without Chet, they have a plus 20 net rating. When he is on the floor without J-Dub, they have a plus 25 net rating. When he is on the floor without Hartenstein, they have a plus 20 net rating. And some of that is a testament to OKC's depth, same as we're talking about Boston having so much supporting cast talent. OKC isn't quite on that level, but they have a really, really good top-to-bottom roster. But SGA is also just capable of basically dragging any group to like a 120 offensive rating right now. In his numbers per 75 possessions, when J-Dub is off the floor, SGA is averaging like 41 points on 68% true shooting. We are at the point now where teams are legitimately determining that their best option to deal with SGA is to trap him at half court. Because I just watched the Nuggets have zero answers for him out of pick and roll. Sending 2 to the ball, he was destroying them. Sitting in deep drop, he was destroying them. And now you're just getting to the place where it's like, okay, just make anybody else beat us. SGA is doing that as a top 3 offensive player with one of the highest scoring floors and best scoring skill sets we've ever seen, while being a legitimate plus playmaker, while being a legitimate plus defender. And then on the other side of the ball, I'm getting a top 5 defensive player. I think Chet Holmgren is the best healthy rim protector in basketball. I've talked about this since he was a prospect, but his verticality, his timing as a shot blocker, the best in the league. The guy's averaging 4 blocks per 36 minutes. He's holding opposing players 20% below their average field goal percentage at the rim. That is an unfathomable number. I've never seen anything like that.
Did 20, you say 20?
20. It is out of this world. It's so much better than anybody else in basketball this year. So I'm getting a top 3 offensive player and a top 5 defensive player, and they're both also big pluses on the other end. Shai is a real plus defender. Chet is a real plus offensive player. And when I'm thinking about them as a foundation, I love all the bases that I get covered on both sides of the ball. I love the complementary nature of their skill sets, having that dominant guard and that dominant big, the 2-man game I can get with them. Chet as a pick and popper, Shai destroying everybody out of pick and roll. So the only reason they can't be higher for me right now is because of Chet's offense. Before Chet got hurt at the start of this year, he was playing like a top 20 player. And as a huge Chet fan, I was extremely, extremely excited about that. That hasn't been the case since his return. He was super aggressive as a driver before he got hurt, more so than we've ever seen. That was really impressive. The shot was falling at a high clip. I need to see that driving aggression come back. Need to see him getting to the line at that same rate. Need to see him develop as a mismatch attacker. That's the big thing. That's really the difference we've seen between him and my other beloved darling Evan Mobley as the years gone along. Mobley is able to play with that physicality to impose himself against smaller guys, run inverted pick and roll, draw a mismatch, and then easily score over that guy. Chet isn't doing that right now. So that's an area for development. And then the three ball just needs to be more consistent. I think he's a better shooter than the percentages would show right now, but there are stretches where he's tentative, he's just a bit off, he runs a bit cold. You're talking about compared to Gobert. I mean, he's tiers and tiers above Gobert as an offensive player. I also think that Shai is multiple tiers above Ant as an offensive player. And per 36, Chet is still giving you 20, 11, 2.5 assists with 5 stocks per game on 59% true shooting. And I think he has shown that he is capable of playing a good bit better than that. So I was very conflicted between this duo and the other Boston duo. I'll get into my decision making with that because both these duos are a little bit higher up on my list than where we are right now. But I think you're basically weighing the offensive polish that you get from Porzingis, which I think clearly surpasses Chet in that gap, versus the gap between SGA and Tatum.
I completely agree.
Or even though I think Tatum is a top 5 player right now, SGA is having one of those all-time guard seasons. He's just an offensive mega force, and that does make a sizable difference in terms of just the floor that he individually gives you. So I'm high on this duo. Are you moving them up one spot to number 6?
I am going to bump them to number 6. I don't think it's logically consistent with my criteria. I've just looked at this long enough, and I wouldn't feel comfortable having it's a really similar duo. I had Mobley and Mitchell above them.
Okay.
I'm going to switch that just because I think there's a massive gap between Mitchell and SGA right now, and then defensively, I don't think there's a big enough gap between Holmgren and Mobley for me to justify having them above them. So I'm going to bump Mobley and Mitchell to my 7 spot, and SGA and Chet are going to go into my 6 spot.
I love it. I have Mitchell and Mobley in my 7 spot as well. I do feel like Shai alone basically puts the Shai and Chet duo above them. Like, I do think that Mobley is better than Chet, but again, when Shai can take any group of dudes and get you to like a plus 18, plus 20, plus 25 net rating, he's just one of those all-time great offensive players. I love Donovan Mitchell. He's obviously not that, but with this duo, you're getting like 2 top 15-ish players. Mitchell is stamped there. I think Mobley is probably about the 15th best player in basketball right now. And the Cavs have been a dominant team with them on the floor. They've been a dominant team overall. And again, I mean, you'll notice a theme here, right? There are 3 teams that this regular season have been way better than everybody else. The Cavs, the Thunder, and the Celtics. Those teams don't have the 3 best duos in basketball, but they have like the best 3 through 8s in basketball. I think that's important to consider everything with this duos list. But they have been absolutely dominant with these two on the floor. And when you have Mitchell and Mobley out there without Garland, the Cavs have a plus 16 net rating. When you have Mitchell and Mobley out there without Allen, they have a plus 15 net rating. So they have been dominant.
You know what's crazy, man?
What?
I actually think if I had like multiple duos for every team, because I didn't do this for every team, I mean, Mobley and Garland might have a spot on this list above like Ant and Gobert or Brunson and Cat.
And that's why I didn't do it, because I think you might end up with 5 or 6 duos just from the Cavs and Celtics. Like Garland and Mitchell, too. I mean, I get that they don't have such obviously complementary skill sets, but they're a dominant backcourt.
I even thought Tatum and White for a little bit.
So that's why I put the limit on myself for that exact reason, because the 3 best rosters in basketball are just that stacked. And the Cavs do have a dominant top 4. Garland has been a top 25 player this year. Jared Allen is the 40-something best player in basketball, probably. He's really, really good. But these two are an amazing foundation. To me, this is the duo because the Cavs stagger their minutes a lot, where for extended stretches, you'll see them out there with one ball handler and one big, and the other ball handler and the other big is sitting. And normally it's Mitchell and Mobley who play together, and it's Garland and Allen who play together. Not always, but the majority of the time. And these two just really, really do enhance each other. Mitchell has always been one of the best pick and roll scorers in basketball. He's a 90th percentile pick and roll creator. Just an insane combination of downhill force with his quickness, his athleticism, but also his footwork in the lane, his variety of pickups. He's got the signature windmill pickup, his touch in the lane, and his finishing there. And then he's also this insane pull-up shooting guard who can give you 40% from 3 shooting on 10-plus attempts per game at any moment. And then he's also a good playmaker, really creative, impressive kick-out and lay-down passes. And where I think we've seen Mitchell grow is as an off-ball player, and I think that's helped Darius Garland as well. Mitchell's an 82nd percentile spot-up player and a really, really imposing shooter there as well. So offensively, love what I'm getting from him. Mobley is damn near the perfect defensive big because I have so much versatility with him in terms of scheme. I can switch everything and know that he can guard so many different wings at a really high level. He can guard some of these smaller guards even in short stretches, and then he's also an elite rim protector, and he's a super versatile offensive player. He can screen for me, he can pop, he can roll, he can run inverted pick and roll and attack mismatches, or he can play make, he can push and transition, he can run handoffs. It's just a really, really great duo that I feel like I have so much flexibility with in terms of how I want them to play and how I want the dudes around them to play. And that's where I think you see, again, if you put them with another ball handler and with another big, okay, they can still dominate because of Mitchell's off-ball play, because of Mobley's ability to play at both the 4 and the 5 on both sides of the ball. But then if I want those two to go out there and run things for me with just a few wings, well, now we're actually statistically even more dominant than we are with our third and fourth best players in a vacuum on the floor. That speaks to why I like this duo as a foundation so much. I just do think there are more overwhelmingly talented duos above them. And for the most part, the duos who I have higher than them have that one dominant individual force, at least a top 10 player. And Mitchell is not quite that, nor is Mobley.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's applicable for all of my duos as well.
So you have Shai and Chet at number 6. I'll get into my number 6, one of my favorite duos in basketball, just recently married. I have Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler here. We only have 232 minutes of this duo together, small sample size, but in those minutes, they're a plus 12 net team. And I was talking about how I really like how Mitchell and Mobley complement each other. I love how Steph and Jimmy complement each other. Steph, to be fair, makes everybody to ever exist better offensively because he's the greatest shooter ever and he's the greatest off-ball player ever and his gravity is unparalleled. But Jimmy is a great complement to that because he's such an amazing connector. If Steph draws 2 to the ball, he can attack those 4-on-3s. He's an excellent cutter. He's somebody who's very willing to screen and then roll and dissect off the short roll. He's a high-end rim pressurer. He gets to the line a ton, which is something Steph doesn't do and something the Warriors offense hasn't done for years. So there's that very valuable contrast of a guy who can really score effectively in the paint in a number of ways and then the greatest scorer from beyond the arc that we've ever seen. And it's no coincidence to me that Steph is playing by far his best basketball of the year with Jimmy Butler out there. In the games that Steph has played with Jimmy, he's averaging 30 points per game on 69% true shooting, and the Dubs have a 12-1 record. So I just think about the foundation I have with this too, the feel, the IQ, how complementary their skill sets are, and I love all the different personnel combinations I could put alongside them. Because they're the Warriors and they already have Draymond Green, they've basically always been going either small ball or they've been playing their big 3 with Quinton Post, so they have a stretch 5 because otherwise Dre and Jimmy would maybe cause some spacing problems for you with their non-shooting alongside a non-shooting center. But if this were another world, if I'm just viewing them as my foundation and they are all that I have painted on an otherwise blank canvas, well, then I feel like I could play them with a true big, and that could be an excellent group. We know that the small ball lineups are so effective. I just think the way that these two play basketball, which not to be cliche, but very much is the right way, is going to enhance anyone. And I just really, really love what that provides me. And I think it's the reason that the Dubs have gone from a team that was stuck in the mud to like maybe the best team in basketball just in terms of the pure results since they made this move.
Yeah, I've got Steph and Jimmy in my number 4 spot, and
Okay.
I look at both of these guys as number 1s, and that's why they're so high for me. Is
Jimmy?
Yeah, I don't know what, like, Jimmy's not one of the top number 1s in the league, but he would still be a number 1 to me in a playoff setting, and now that Jimmy can slide into that number 2 role, I think it's just better for him, and I think that he's, like you said, I mean, they enhance one another. They're both genius basketball players. I think a lot of combinations would work around them. And Well, one, I just think people are maybe a little bit too low on both of these guys. Steph Curry is back to that superhuman level. I think it's due to a few reasons. One, that they've brought Jimmy in here, and that's alleviated some of the pressure off of him. But Jimmy's a guy that can find him in his spots and set him up. But also, Steph has a new lease on life. Like, I do think the mental component cannot be overlooked when you're talking about basketball players. Like, Steph has to be reinvigorated and rejuvenated and feels like we got a chance to do something special again. And I think that there's just extra motivation. And I think that is a big part of why we've seen him have this resurgence when a lot of people, oh, Steph's washed, Steph's on the downturn. And then I think a lot of people are really too low on Jimmy Butler. This guy is a well-rounded basketball player, is going to impact the game in every facet, offensively, on the glass, and defensively. And I don't really care about any of the regular season numbers because all of the Jimmy Butler detractors point to, oh, he's averaging, I don't know, whatever, sub 20 points per game,
17,
or he's at
6 and 5. Yeah.
Oh, he's at just this and this. I don't care. I know what Jimmy Butler is when he gets to the playoffs, and it may not be 2020 Jimmy Butler. It may not be NBA Finals Jimmy Butler. Whatever. That guy cranks it up a notch in the playoffs, and that's also a cliche, but I still believe that. Jimmy Butler to me is a better wing than Jaylen Brown. He's a more well-rounded basketball player. Like, there's a veteran craft and feel and IQ that I get with Jimmy that I don't get with other players, where Jimmy just settles a lot of things. And I think they complement one another. I think Steph is still one of the best offensive players on the planet, and I still think Jimmy Butler is close to being a number one. And so I'm getting that as my top duo. I love it. I've loved everything that I've gotten. And I thought that I was going to love this move. I love it even more now that we've gotten a decent sample size out of it. So Steph and Jimmy are number 4 for me.
Agreed. And if you're not watching the Warriors closely, you still might not have a full appreciation for what Jimmy Butler has been doing with this team, because the raw production for him isn't overwhelming, but it's just so many valuable things. I talk about all of the different things that he does in terms of being a plug-and-play guy to enhance this offense. Elite offensive rebounding, his defensive versatility and off-ball value. Like, he's completely turned their season around, and I wouldn't say that he's a number one still really in any particularly good situation, but he's a pick-his-spots guy. Doesn't have to be a super high-volume offensive player to have a huge impact, because he will do all the little things. And then when you need it, he's still been super efficient on ball, still super hard to keep off the line, still a big, strong wing who can shoot over top of you.
That's a good way to characterize it. I guess he can be a number one when he needs to. Jimmy can pick his spots and affect the game. And just as a small example, like, because I know a lot of people, judge their opinions off of like box scores. It would be like someone saying to me that they would rather have Cade Cunningham right now than Jimmy Butler. And like, Cade is great, and Cade is an offensive engine, I think, at this point. But he's not like, he's still not Jimmy to me, if that makes sense. Like, Jimmy is just, there's a little more polish that I still feel like I get with a veteran guy like Jimmy than I do with a guy like Cade. Even though all the raw numbers you'll look at will say, oh, well, he's outproducing him, I don't think it equates to winning impact.
I don't think there's any question that you'd rather have Cade as your number one if you just need somebody to raise your floor to win 45 games. I don't think there's any question you'd rather have Jimmy Butler as your number two if you're trying to go from a 35-win team to a 50-plus win team. That's how I'd put it. I think they're actually on a very similar level as basketball players, and they're both currently cast in their right roles. Jimmy has found his dream role and his dream fit with the Warriors.
It really is.
And I think that that's why they have to be at least as high as I have them at number 6. You have them at number 5. So
I have them at number 4.
So who do you have at your number 5?
This is where I have Jayson Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis.
Same here.
I went with Tatum and Porzingis over SGA and Chet just because I have that much more confidence in Porzingis' offensive game. Because SGA to me is head and shoulders above Tatum, and that's no slight to Tatum because I think he affects the game more than SGA in certain areas, right? As a rebounder, as a defender, I think Tatum clears him. I'd hear an argument as a playmaker, right? There's just a different level of scoring that I get with SGA on a nightly basis, and I value that more. That being said, I think there's a level of consistency that I get with Porzingis offensively versus Chet that I prefer to him as a mismatch attacker, as a guy in the post, as a floor spacer. Like, Porzingis is going to pick his spots too, but he's not going to mess them up. Like, I that finals, Carson, is just ingrained in my brain. Like the Maverick series, it really is. It's something that I'm never going to forget as a basketball fan. Where Kristaps Porzingis, we call him a unicorn. He's a secret weapon that can just get deployed whenever the Celtics need him. And for the Celtics situation, he's like a topper. He's like a garnish in a lot of ways, where they don't necessarily need Porzingis, but when they put him out there, it just puts him over the top. The Celtics cup just runneth over. But
yeah,
when he's out on the court, there's not really anybody that can stop him. I mean, again, I just think about the Dallas series where they get a switch and he's just shooting over the top of guys, and they get it to him in the post and he's just completely unstoppable, and he's pulling shots from 26 feet and they're cash. Like, Porzingis is such a secret weapon, and the fact that you felt his impact so highly in like 20 minutes a night in the NBA Finals, I really think speaks volumes about his game. But I debated between these two for a while, SGA and Chet and KP and Tatum, and I think that Tatum and KP are the better defensive duo, and I just marginally prefer KP's offensive game to Chet. But this one is one I agonized over, and I thought about a long time for, but I marginally prefer Tatum and Porzingis.
Super close debate for me as well. I have these duos in my 4 and 5 spots, and I do have SGA and Chet one spot higher. And as I alluded to earlier, what it comes down to is that, to me, the gap between SGA as that sort of monumental offensive force and Tatum does exceed the gap between KP, who I do think is better than Chet. But you know how high I am on KP. I talk about it all the time. I just think he does some of the most valuable things at the center position at an A-plus level. He is an A-plus floor spacer, A-plus pick and pop big. He is an A-plus post-score mismatch attacker. You cannot guard him without fouling, and he can shoot over top of you with such overwhelming efficiency, and he's gotten so much more physical and comfortable as a post player over the last couple years. And he's an A-plus rim protector. He's the only guy who has a number that is anywhere close to Chet in terms of opponent field goal percentage at the rim. It's still not all that close because Chet's at 20% below average. KP is at holding guys 14% below their average, but like, that is still an absolutely insane number. And when I think about the foundation I'm getting with these two, I do prefer it to the foundation that I'm getting from Tatum and Brown, because I feel like I'm just covering more of my bases with these two as my starting point. I also think that KP is a better player than Jaylen Brown in a vacuum, but especially when it comes to putting together this duo, KP to me excels at the more valuable aspects of the game, more efficient, more distinct traits when I'm holding him alongside Jayson Tatum and thinking about putting together a duo. So I have Tatum, who to me is the 5th best player in basketball, most versatile player in the league today. Really high-end playmaker, high-end scorer, high-end super versatile defender, high-end rebounder, gives me 27, 9, and 6 on 59% true shooting. And then I have KP, who, as I mentioned, elite pop big, elite post-up big, elite rim protector. And when I think about these two and how they amplify each other, like, you can't guard the Tatum KP pick and roll. You just can't do it, because you certainly cannot sit in a drop. You're either conceding an open pull-up 3 to Jayson Tatum, or even worse, you're conceding an open pick and pop 3 to Kristaps Porzingis. And then, as we talked about, all the predicaments that you get in when you're trying to guard Jayson Tatum running pick and roll. If you switch and he finds a mismatch he likes, that's a problem. If you send 2 to the ball, he's going to find an open shooter. Maybe it's KP, maybe it's somebody else. This is the team with the greatest overall shooting talent we've ever seen. Boston is. That's a major problem. So I have this sort of dominant offensive two-man game when I want it. Defensively, it's an elite duo. I have so many things that I can do. I can put Tatum on centers in certain matchups if I really want to be switching everything, and I can have KP down low as a roamer. I can pre-switch certain actions so I feel like he doesn't ever have to come out and guard in space. But if I'm playing more traditional coverages, well, then I have Tatum as a really, really high-end wing defender, and I have KP as an elite drop defender and an elite pure rim protector in terms of shooting. This is an elite duo in terms of mismatch attacking. Elite duo. Like, if you're switching pick and roll with these guys, one of them is going to end up with a really, really advantageous matchup, and they're going to destroy you. So It's just a very, very complete duo. And I do feel like as a foundation compared to Tatum and Brown, it just gives me a more elite starting point, and it gives me more options to build around them and construct a contender. But the reason that I have SGA and Chet higher, like I said, I just don't think you can really overstate the value of what SGA is doing as one of the greatest scorers we've ever seen, who gives you 33 points per game on almost 65% true shooting and gets wherever he wants on the floor and demands insane amounts of defensive attention. That to me is the gap. I don't have a problem with you flipping it, but I feel like when I'm stacking these two teams up against each other, Boston and OKC, who I've considered the top two title contenders end to end all year since before the season began, the reason that I think OKC has a shot against Boston, even though I think Boston is more overwhelmingly talented in total, is basically because I think their defense is so historically great and because I think they can have the best player on the floor in that series by far. And that best player factor is owed to Shai. And the defense factor is a testament to the totality of the team, but above all else, it's about Chet being the best defensive player on the team and one of the best defenders on the planet, and that's why I lean on them. I feel like if you gave them Boston's surrounding shooting, if you gave Shai and Chet, Derek White, and we'll say Jaylen Brown instead of J-Dub in this situation, and you gave them Peyton Pritchard and Al Horford, etc., I definitely take the Thunder to win that series, and that to me was kind of the tiebreaker.
It's a good argument.
Okay, so now you have Jimmy and Steph at number 4. I have Shai and Chet at number 4. We're into the top 3, which I think is interesting because, again, we've already gotten through all the duos with the 3 best teams in basketball. But who do you have as your number 3 duo?
I have Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray.
Okay.
It's basically all down to Murray and where he stacks up with other guys on this list. I mean, he's among the 3 worst players on the list. And Jokic, in my opinion, is the best player in the world and the best player on the list. I couldn't have Jokic any lower than this, in my opinion, and I think that's a big component of your SGA argument, too, which I completely understand because he's at such a high level. Like, you just have to have him. You know, his value alone brings up the duo on their list. And you're getting a hell of a lot from Chet. I don't want to take anything away from him. But I couldn't have Jokic any lower than this, and that was the dilemma that I was facing. Like, would I really want to have Steph and Jimmy because Jimmy's that much better than Jamal? Well, I do think that Jimmy's that much better than Jamal, but I'm not passing up Jokic. Jokic alone warrants a top 3 placement on this list, in my opinion. And to be fair, I mean, Jamal's looked a lot better. Like, a lot of the struggles that we saw at the start of the year, I'm not really as worried about Jamal anymore. Like, couldn't find his footing. And don't get me wrong, he's still not the most consistent guy, but he's trying his ass off defensively. I've been really proud of Jamal on that end, but he's still a good offensive player. I think he can struggle in certain matchups, right, because of his athletic limitations and his reliance on tough shot making. And Jamal can be a tough watch in certain games where I question his decision making. But on the whole, I still think Jamal's a really, really good offensive player. And when he's hot, Jamal's a stud. I mean, you still can't count that out. So this is basically just Jokic dragging the duo up this high. But Jamal's still a good offensive player, and they ultimately really complement one another. The one thing that I think holds them back outside of Jamal from being higher on this list is just the defensive ceiling I think you could put around this team. And I think Jokic's defensive struggles kind of get overplayed sometimes, but there are effort concerns in certain games. There's a ceiling to a team that you can build defensively with a guy like Jokic at the 5 and with a guy like Jamal at the 1. Similar to what I was saying earlier about Brunson and Cat, but on a significantly lower level just because of how great they're going to be offensively. And I think Jokic is a better defender than Cat because Jokic...
And Jamal is a significantly better defender than Brunson.
He's bigger.
Like, I don't disagree. Like, you're not going to build an elite defense, but we saw them put out the number 8 defense last year. We saw them put out a really good playoff defense in their title run in 2023.
It's not
the
impossible.
Concern is much less significant than it is with Brunson and Cat.
I completely agree. And I think that also is spoken to the point with how great the personnel is around Brunson and Cat. Like, they have elite defensive personnel around those guys, and they're still not a great defense. Jokic and Murray may be liabilities too, but they're able to normally with just effort and energy, they're able to put out a pretty good product. But that's why they can't be higher for me. Ultimately, I think the gap in second best players in the duos above them is just too large to make up for it.
I actually have Jokic and Jamal as my number 2 duo. And
so you have Giannis and Dame in 3.
That's correct, I do. And I thought about these two up against each other. It's really interesting to me because part of what I think got us thinking about this was seeing our buddy Dells say that the Jays were the number 1 duo in basketball. That's Dells from Pick a Side. And Logan, I know that you took issue with that and you put out the duos you thought were better than Tatum and Brown, and everybody got mad at you. What's just so funny to me about that argument, I mean, not only the fact that it ignores the historic total roster that Boston has. Like, if the idea is, hey, these guys just won the title, so they're the best. Again, that's not how basketball works. Titles aren't won by 2 players. But if we are going to look at the contributions of the top 2 guys from our last 2 champions and compare what Jaylen and Tatum did last year to what Jamal and Jokic did 2 years ago, Jokic had, in my opinion, the greatest offensive playoff run ever, while Jamal is giving you 26 points and 7 assists per game on good efficiency. And last year, we're talking about Tatum really struggling as a shooter, Jaylen even having his inconsistencies. Like, obviously, what the Nuggets duo did was far greater in terms of their individual contributions to that team's title, because that roster in totality was not nearly as talented as the Celtics last year. That's why I think it's a very, very funny argument that anybody would have to try to make for Tatum and Brown as the number 1 duo, because even if you're saying, hey, well, you have to have won the title, okay, well, the better duo won the title 2 years ago.
And then you just get into some funny thought exercises too. It's like, all right, well, where's Steph and Draymond going to be? Because it's not that long ago that they won a title. It's stupid.
Yeah, but over the last 2 years since that title team, the Nuggets are a plus 15 net team when Jokic and Jamal share the floor. That is dominant. We're talking about like the Cavs this year, Boston this year, OKC this year, that sort of on-court dominance, obviously without that same level of overall talent alongside them. Even crazier, they have a 129.5 offensive rating when they are out there together. So we're talking about an offensive duo that has produced results on that end that are absolutely historic.
I was going to ask, I mean, just solely offensively, are they the best offensive duo in basketball to you?
I would still have my number 1 duo above them.
I think so too.
Just because of the raw talent. We haven't seen the number 1 duo do offensively what Jokic and Jamal have, but I would bet on them reaching a level in terms of what they can do as a duo that is even higher than Jokic and Jamal. But that is close. And this has been the best offensive duo in basketball for the last several years. And I know that some people are automatically going to go, when I talk about that net rating with these two, and say, oh, well, that's because the Nuggets always play all their starters together, et cetera, et cetera. All these arguments you always hear about Jokic's on-off numbers or whatever. Well, over the last 2 years, when Jokic and Jamal are on the floor, without Aaron Gordon, that's 1,000 minutes. They have a plus 15 net rating. Without Christian Brown, when these two are on the floor, in 1,400 minutes, they have a plus 15 net rating. When these two are on the floor, without MPJ, they have a plus 12 net rating. So it's these two. Obviously, it's Jokic above all else because he's just producing historic offensive results when he's on the court, no matter what. But Jamal really is a phenomenal complement to him. And like in all of those different combinations that I just mentioned, when you take any one of those other key Nuggets players off the floor, Jokic and Jamal are putting out like a 128 to 130 offensive rating when they're on the floor. It's just so insane. And I feel like you have to appreciate that no other duo has anything close to that resume of offensive dominance together. And the reason that I am comfortable having them at number 2 above Giannis and Dame is because Jamal is now playing some of his best regular season basketball ever. Early in the year, Jamal was struggling. First 18 games, he was like under 18 points per game on 53% true shooting. Really struggling, which was carrying over from his very bad postseason performance last year, and it was all very concerning. But now, over his last 40 games, he's over 23 points per game on 61% true shooting. In those 40 games, he's been over 45% from mid-range, 42% from three, 50% on floaters, 67% in the restricted area, super efficient from all over the floor. And he is such a great shot maker. Some of the tough shots weren't falling early in the year, but they are consistently now, and he's finishing better. And he just looks like the best version of Jamal Murray, who is a really scary offensive player who could do what he did in the bubble in 2020 and what he did in the 2023 title run. So I do think that this is certainly the most complementary elite offensive duo in basketball. This is the best two-man game in basketball. When these two run pick and roll together, there are no good options when Jamal is on. You cannot concede a pocket pass to Jokic because then you're dead. You do not want to let Jokic pop with how he's been shooting the ball this year. If you concede a switch to Jamal that he likes, he's going to create space and get to a pull-up jumper that he really, really likes. There's just so many different ways for them to kill you. Murray's an 85th percentile pick and roll creator. Jokic is an 82nd percentile efficiency roll man scorer. And obviously, I mean, they are so effective running handoffs together. Jokic is such a great screener and great passer there, and you create space for Jamal as a pull-up shooter. They're a dominant offensive duo. They were meant to play basketball together, and I think Jokic would enhance a whole lot of guys, but I really do think him and Jamal have a tremendous two-man game that there's no comparison for elsewhere in the league today. And you look at the offensive results they've produced, I mean, they just surpass by so much what Giannis and Dame have done. And that really is the difference to me. Like, Giannis and Dame, if we were going to rank this in terms of what you were saying earlier, right? Okay, Jokic is the best player in basketball, but Giannis is the second best. And then Dame is like maybe, let's say, the 22nd best player in the NBA, or the 20th. I don't know exactly. And Jamal is like maybe the 35th. Well, if we were just adding up the totals, that would say the Bucks have the better duo. But they've never found that synergy between Dame and Giannis in a way that is remotely similar to what Jamal and Jokic have. And you've seen that to me with the on-court results. You've seen it with the offensive results. And that's why I do still have Jokic and Jamal as my number two duo above them.
That's fair. I just think the gap between Dame and Jamal is too large for me to ignore. Also, Giannis isn't average defensively. He can still be more impactful than Jokic defensively, and that's an advantage they have. And I agree with you. I still don't think we've seen the best that Dame and Giannis could be together. And I'm frankly a little disappointed considering that this is year 2 into the experiment. That being said, I still do think they create advantages for one another and do enhance each other. Like Dame with his... Dame is still so damn good. And like, I know that there's not a ton of attention on him, but like the floor spacing, the feel, Damian Lillard makes it look so easy on a nightly basis still. Like, I feel like there's still just a poise gap that I get between Jamal and Dame on a nightly basis, and that's why I'll lean him. But I am disappointed. I don't know, man. You'd think that in year 2 of this that the offensive results would be better, and it still feels like I'm wanting more. I'm wanting more from them. And so I understand your justification. That being said, I think there's a defensive gap between Jokic and Giannis, and I think that there's a large enough gap just as individual players between Jamal and Dame. And that's ultimately why I went with Giannis and Dame. And I still do think they complement each other. They don't complement each other like Jokic and Jamal, because Jokic and Jamal is like peanut butter and jelly, right? Yeah. They just go together. There's nothing, it's whatever combination you want to point to. They're perfect together. They fit like a glove. But I still do slightly prefer Giannis and Dame.
To me, this basically comes down to, do you prefer the gap in terms of raw talent between Dame and Jamal, or do you prefer what Jokic and Jamal can do offensively together?
I still trust Dame more individually.
I get that. That being said, I do think that Jokic is just the GOAT offensive force, and so in totality, he and Jamal produce incredible results there. When Giannis and Dame share the floor, the Bucks are only a +7 net team. Now, I do think that they have not put a very good supporting cast around them. That is significant. The talent that the two of them have is potentially overwhelming. But as we said, I don't think that their fit has ever really gelled perfectly. I thought that Dame Giannis pick and roll was going to break the league, and it just never has. Giannis has never really shown that willingness to be a screener at that sort of high volume. But nevertheless, like, we're talking about an all-time rim pressurer and rim finisher in Giannis with an all-time shooter in Damian Lillard. That's still insane for defenses to have to deal with. Dame has had a bounce-back year. He's giving you 25, 5, and 7 on 62% true shooting. Still one of the most dominant pick-and-roll scorers in basketball. With this unbelievable range, he can stretch defenses so far out. And Giannis has grown offensively as a playmaker. Shot selection has improved. Mid-range game has improved. He's giving you 31, 12, and 6 on 62% true shooting. So the advantage that they have over Jamal and Jokic is you legitimately feel like with Dame and Giannis, either guy can take over and be the best offensive player in a series against some elite teams. If Dame went out and dropped 33 a game on 65% true shooting in a 6-game series, you'd be like, yeah, Dame is like that. If Giannis did the exact same thing, you wouldn't bat an eye.
I mean, honestly, would we be that surprised if Jamal did that?
I would be more surprised if Jamal did it than
I would be
Dame
more
did
surprised, but I mean, Jamal still got that in there.
And the difference is, like, the expectation with Jokic is that he's going to be the best offensive player ever in every series. So to me, that outweighs the raw talent advantage that I do think Dame has over Jamal. And then when it comes down to the number one duo, Logan, we're both going to agree here.
Chris Middleton and Jordan Poole.
I mean, you look at what they've done, Logan. Middleton's got a plus 16 on-off swing with the Wizards. They might have a winning record in his time there. I know they have a positive net rating when he's on the floor. I just don't know how you deny that.
Yeah, I think they're the cutest duo in basketball too, man.
Well, Middleton is certainly an acquired taste. If you like jagged teeth, if you like people who resemble the angler fish that you might find in the deep sea, then I can definitely see it. Yeah. Oh, sure.
I mean, I don't know how you could have any other duo. At the start of the year, if you told me that Luka Doncic and LeBron James are going to be on the same team,
you would have creamed and busted and everything?
Yeah,
yeah.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's the most scoring, playmaking, mismatch attacking. It's perfect. It's perfect. Like, I guess the only thing that can make this duo better is if one were more like singularly defensive oriented and could make your defense great, but it's like the offense that these two are going to produce is so great on a nightly basis. I don't even care. And also, LeBron's been playing his ass off defensively, so that's not even that big of a concern to me. Mm-hmm. The only argument I guess I would hear for another duo is if you were really, really concerned about Luka Doncic and the level that he's at right now, which I would hear you out if you wanted to have Giannis and Dame one, or if you wanted to have Jokic and Jamal one. Or hell, I mean, even your fourth duo, if you wanted to have SGA and Chet, I do think you have to have one of the best players in the world in this number one spot, which is a prerequisite. So I think it would have to be Luka and LeBron. I think it would have to be Giannis and Dame. I think it would have to be Jokic and Jamal. Or I think it would have to be SGA and Chet if you were going to make an argument against a Luka and LeBron, just because I think that's a prerequisite to check. But I'm getting one of the best players in the world in Luka Doncic, who I still believe is that, and I'm getting a guy who I still think is top 10 in LeBron James. But the argument against it, I think, would be that you're skeptical about Luka Doncic and the level that he's been at since joining LA and coming back from injury. And even so, like, we were on Player's Choice earlier talking about some of Luka's shortcomings, even, right now where he's at. But it's like, I still believe on any given game, who were they playing when he just went off at Staples Center when he was draining every deep three?
The Denver game was his first real explosion.
I think it was the Denver game. Luka is prone to having those kind of explosions, but he also gives you such a high floor as a playmaker. It's the greatest offensive duo I think you could maybe conceive in NBA history, man. It's so disgusting. Two big-ass dudes who can both handle, who can both mismatch attack, who are geniuses, who can score at all three levels, who can make every pass in the book. We've never seen this combination of talent before in NBA history. It's unbelievable. I think they've got to be number one.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should need to be sold on this one too much, even though the results aren't necessarily there yet. The resume isn't there, right? They certainly haven't gone out and done what Jokic and Jamal did in a title run. The Lakers are actually only a +2 net team when these two share the floor up to this point. But it's Luka and LeBron. It's 2 top 10 players. Nobody else in the NBA has that right now. It's 2 all-time offensive greats. Nobody else has that. So starting from my premise, which isn't about resume, it's about if I could pick to start and build the rest of my team out around any duo, this is definitely the one that I would pick. I don't have any concerns about the offensive fit, even though they both have the ball in their hands a good bit. I think LeBron is best suited at this point to have a guy who can be a real primary ball handler alongside him. He's been so good off ball, and then LeBron is still able to be an absolute weapon with the ball in his hands. But there's just so much collective IQ, passing, as you mentioned, the mismatch attacking. Nobody is built to guard both of these dudes in one game. I would just bet on that above everything else. If you are like, hey, well, we've seen Jokic and Jamal do it. We've seen them put up, again, a 128, 130 offensive rating consistently for a couple years when they're on the floor. I understand that. And to me, at that point, you're basically just saying, I think Jokic is that far clear of both Luka and LeBron that I would still take that duo. And I do think that Jokic is still way better than Luka. But the aggregate talent is just too much, man. It's just too much. Like, I know that LeBron can go out there and give me 38 and 8 on great efficiency in any series, and Luka can do the exact same thing. It's a level of offensive talent in a duo that we've never seen take this exact form. Like, I think that Steph and KD is the greatest offensive duo that we've ever seen. And shout out Kobe and Shaq, and shout out Magic and Kareem. There's some absolute great ones. But we've never seen a playmaking duo like this. We've never seen an on-ball creating duo like this. And that's just too much for me to deny the number 1 spot.
It borders on unfair.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you put a good team defense around them, like we've seen, and even without playing their best offensively, the Lakers have been reeling off wins. They were reeling off wins when these two were healthy. You mentioned the Luka concerns. I have mentioned throughout the year and throughout the playoff run last year, Luka not getting to the rim at nearly the same rate, that giving him a lower floor as a scorer than he used to have, making him more dependent on shot making, where you're just going to see some more volatility. And obviously he's been super inefficient since joining the Lakers. I do think things will get better. Now, I don't think he's ever getting back to driving at the rate that he was 2-3 years ago. I think we have seen a permanent change in Luka to becoming more reliant on his shot making. But I also think he got better as a shot maker last year. He was shooting 38% from 3 on high volume in the regular season, whereas previously he'd always been like a 34% kind of guy. If he can be that level of shooter, then that really diminishes the concerns that I have about him not driving at the same rate. In an ideal world, he'd put it all together, but that might not be in the cards. If he's making more of his shots and if he's driving a bit more, getting all the way downhill both to score and to pass, then you're talking about a Luka who is an offensive monster. To me, he's still the 4th best player on the planet, and LeBron is absolutely top 10. Nobody else has that sort of 2 superstars on their roster.
Agreed.
Who would you like to shout out as an honorable mention, Logan? A tough cut here who just missed the list for you.
As we mentioned, KD and Book are definitely my closest cut. But some other guys you mentioned earlier, Halliburton and Siakam would be a good shout. I think they complement each other so well. I think Siakam's been excellent as a transition scorer. I think he's been excellent as a defender this year. And then I guess I'd shout out Triple J and Ja. You know, they're just... Because, you know, I mentioned like an Anthony Edwards and a Rudy Gobert, and you can go, okay, well, you know, you got the defensive anchor in a Triple J. You've got an offensive guy in Ja Morant, and Triple J doesn't have the glaring defensive flaws, or offensive flaws, excuse me, that a Rudy Gobert does, right? He's now a plus on that end. I just think there's a different reliability in the offense that I get with Anthony Edwards, and I still am a little bit skeptical and a little bit nervous about the Grizzlies, and specifically that duo in a playoff series, to where I would just leave them off. But I mean, honestly, all this speaks to me is just the ridiculous amount of talent that the NBA has nowadays, man. Like the fact that those guys aren't in the top 10. I mean, I think Halliburton is a top 5 point guard. I think Siakam is a top 10 power forward. And, you know, I don't have KD and D book. Like, that's ridiculous, man. Like, the fact that I can, and I know you have them, but the fact that I can make an argument that they're not on the list is pretty crazy.
I do think that you're selling the hell that they are forced to exist in Phoenix a little bit short.
I mean, it's bad.
Very, very bad. The toughest cut for me probably was John Triple J, just because Triple J has gotten so good as a scorer, and he's obviously a top 10 defender alive. I just have more concerns about them. I feel like even though Kawhi hasn't been himself, I know what I'm getting from that duo a bit more, because with Triple J, although he's such a problem as a scorer, as a mismatch attacker, really worry about his passing in a playoff setting, worry about him turning the ball over if he's seeing a lot of doubles. And then with Ja, we've seen him now putting up some bigger numbers as Triple J has been out and he's been given the keys to the offense a bit more, but we've also seen him struggle more so this year. And I know the inefficiency that I'm getting from him as a scorer, especially if he isn't running pick and roll at the volume that we're used to. If you're asking him to be more of a jump shooter, a spot up shooter, he's just not good at it. And I've never been the highest on Ja overall, because I don't think he is the level of half-court offensive player that a lot of the other point guards who he gets put in conversations with are. So I think Triple J is like probably barely a top 20 player, and Ja is around the number 30 player. So they were definitely close, but I do prefer the complimentary stuff I'm getting from Kawhi and Harden a little bit more, and feeling like I know what I'm getting from them as these veteran, more proven playoff players. Obviously, Harden has his playoff issues as a scorer, but he also has his really high-end strength as a playmaker. Shout out Hallie and Siakam. They're a great offensive duo. But Ja and Triple J were the one who I considered the most. On that note, this was a ton of fun for us to do. Hope you guys all enjoyed. If you did, the good news is there's plenty more Nerd Sesh content. You can find it everywhere on our YouTube channel. We've got all our full shows talking about the NBA and the NFL with free agency going on right now. We did a reaction to the moves that had broken as of Monday. You can also find all of our video essays, video breakdowns on our YouTube channel, and you can listen to all of our full episodes wherever you get your audio content. You can also check out our Discord if you want to become part of our community there. That is linked at the link tree across our social media bios. And you can check out our merch if you want. That is at breakingtea.com and is also linked in our link tree. I, Logan, am very excited to watch the Thunder and Celtics play basketball today. Second meeting of the year. First one was an OKC win. Oh, I just get a tingling sensation when I think about watching these teams play. I love watching the best teams in basketball play. So we'll have some thoughts on that on our Friday show. Maybe even sooner, do a little something special. I don't know. We'll see. But very, very much looking forward to that. And with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I have been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.